a new timeline has been set by the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, for its common currency. The new timeline for the ECO has been pushed to 2027, according to ECOWAS President Jean-Claude Kassi Brou. Now, following an ordinary session, a statement noted that the currency, which should have been launched in 2020, suffered various setbacks by the coronavirus pandemic and its aftershocks. The West African bloc has been pursuing a common currency project for more than 2 decades to help remove trade barriers, ease the cost of doing business, and boost economic growth in a region of more than 380 million people, a goal in conformity with the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. Within the bloc, 8 countries that already share the CFA franc have started their reforms ahead of the wider currency project. Our headline story today is ECOWAS sets ECO timeline. I'm Tolulakwe Adeleru Balogun. Welcome. This is Business Edge. Now, joining me on today's show is Tokwe Fasua, economist and the CEO of Global Analytics. Tokwe, welcome to Business Edge once again. Thank you so much for joining me.
Good morning, Tolu. Nice to see you.
So let's take a history lesson or a trip down memory lane. The ECO was first planned to be introduced in 2003, then it was postponed. You had 2005, 2010, 2014. You had so many marks along the lines that we sort of have missed. And then 2020, of course, we know came and is the year that many people would prefer to forget. But now we're hearing 2027. I think, is it not time we ask ourselves if there is still a point to the ECO, or is this a pipe dream that ECOWAS may need to give up on? Let's start from there.
Great question. But of course, 2020 and COVID has become the excuse for everybody to use for non-achievement and so on. But before that happened, the region, the governments of the region had kind of started prevaricating and postponing, like you rightly mentioned, especially Nigeria and, of course, to a lesser extent, Cote d'Ivoire. Funny enough, in December 2019 into January 2020, before COVID became a big issue, President Macron flew to Cote d'Ivoire, and the next thing we heard was that they were adopting the ECO as a replacement for the CFA, which incorporates about eight West African countries, even into there are another 6, I think, to make it 14 countries that are using CFA of different kind, the East African and West African kind. And of course, we were alarmed that something that Nigeria had really very much sponsored, as course, as the big brother in the region, and that we had even, a name that was invented by central banks of this region will be summarily hijacked by the French, So perhaps that's the reason why they are now doubling up to say, okay, what can be done, and what can be done to move ahead. Now, it is not a wasted project. There are a few things to think about here. For example, why do countries come together to form a monetary union, to have a single currency like they did in the Eurozone, for example? Of course, it's all about facilitating trade and also increasing intra-regional trade to reduce the cost of exchange, which is always a big issue among the countries. However, one of the issues that will come up also becomes, are we not supposed to be thinking about a single African currency now that we're talking about AFCFTA?
Yeah.
Of course, that's going to be a lot more difficult to achieve. Perhaps this may not be a bad idea to come together at the regional level and do something good. And of course, yes, maybe I should stop here so that you come in.
All right. So I'm happy you did touch on the situation with those 8 African countries. It was Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, the Ivory Coast, Mali, Niger, Senegal, and Togo, who announced in May of 2020 that they were going to bring about an ECO, peg it to the euro, and it was meant to be backed by the French Treasury. Do you have a theory, very quickly, as to what happened, why they may have decided that they would use the same name that we had already seen a very interesting history from the ECOWAS community in terms of bringing about the ECO. Just very quickly, I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
I think no. I mean, my simple thought on that is that France was being very rude as usual. They have all these countries under their armpit, if you like, but they think they could extend that to the rest of the countries in West African region. They had no right whatsoever. I was one of the few people who wrote an article then, a couple of articles, to say this was egregious, it was wrong. And it was, in fact, that we should actually go after them for copyrights and other, and they will pay big, as much, no matter what stage it was on, because we're talking of something that had been started maybe in the late 90s or thereabout. And then you write in and then you say you want to hijack that name. It's terrible. And of course, I was glad that the central banks of some of the, like Nigeria, Ghana, and co, actually stood up and said, well, this is not going to fly. And I'm not even sure that the French people are giving up on that already. It was just a case of, man, you guys aren't using it. Can we just take it on? If you guys aren't using it and you guys are slowing down on that idea. The concept of CEFA itself is a throwback to slavery, and the fact that, I mean, none of these countries that you mentioned were allowed to have their own central bank. None of them were allowed to have their own currency. And that's what I tell some of our Nigerian people often, that we're not even using the advantages we have. Nobody is breathing down our necks in the way. Do you know when they even keep reserves in the French central bank?
Yeah.
They get to be charged a punitive interest rate for using part of their reserves to balance the economy. And of course, when you look at it, you see that some of the convergence criteria. At that time, I was forced to do a bit of research, find out that many of these West African francophone countries, their inflation was as low as 0.5%, 1%. But the truth is, should they be pursuing a low inflation? Because a low inflation is also somehow equivalent to low growth. A country that has a lot of buzz, that people are productive, will have a slightly higher inflation rate than 0.5%, 1%. But that is what. Why would they be keeping money in French central bank when they could use their money to reboot their economy and to reflate their economy? So what the French did was very wrong, and the fact that Ouattara almost cooperated with them also sends a very wrong signal. And that's what the other countries are stepping up to now, to say that we can run things ourselves. No one should come from Europe and say that we don't know what to do with our ideas and with our economies.
So let's talk more about this idea of the ECO. So the new deadline now is 2027, which is to, of course, replace the mixed date of 2020. That's an extra 7 years. And you mentioned the convergence points. So there are primary and secondary. So let's look at some of these criteria. The 10 convergence criteria set out. The 4 primary include single-digit inflation rates at the end of each year, a fiscal deficit of no more than 4% of the GDP, a central bank deficit financing of no more than 10% of the previous year's tax revenues, and gross external reserves that can import cover of a minimum of 3 months. So far, as of last year, it's only Togo that has met to some level the convergence criteria. Why are these particular criteria so important to the establishment and the uptake of the ECO?
Okay, so if you look at the case of the Eurozone and the euro as the currency, it's the key idea of coming together as one means that your economies should have similar trajectory and similar management, give or take, similar levels of management, so that you can actually say that a Ghanaian economy or an ECO, an ECO currency received in Ghana is as good as received in Nigeria, is as good as received in Togo or Benin Republic or Senegal, wherever the case may be. If you have too high inflation in a particular country, that means that essentially that currency is eroding fast in that country. For example, Nigeria's inflation is about 17.93 now. I mean, for May, if the numbers have been released, 17.93, 18% basically, as against 0.5% in Togo or 1% in Benin Republic or Cote d'Ivoire. So that gives a problem that Nigeria really has to then begin to think of how to walk down that inflation rate to a single digit. Now, single digit, of course, they've given that leeway that it could be 9%, okay, it could be 8%, not too bad. Perhaps in realization of the fact that, economists here actually don't need to target inflation in such a manner. Even the US is not achieving 0.5%, neither is many countries in Europe, So this is very important. For example, we talk about deficit, that the center, it shouldn't be more than 10% of your previous year's taxes, because they don't want a scenario where the central bank of the country in the monetary union is busy issuing money and giving out money to the federal government of that country. Remember that the ability to print and spend is removed. And that was what happened in the case of Greece in Europe, okay? While they were in serious trouble up to a couple of years back, they found themselves yoked in the same monetary union with Germany. That's a German machine producing, secondary, tertiary products, products with serious economic complexity, whereas Greece could not do more than just be a place where people come for tourism, all right? So they found that Greece found out that it couldn't play that game at that same level. Up till now, Greece will not be able to catch up with Germany. In Europe, under the Euro experience, people believe that Germany is basically dragging the rest of them along, and that's why Britain had to exit the union itself. They never joined the currency. So because Britain realized that the UK realized that they cannot play that game with Germany. It's a much more sophisticated economy, a much more efficient economy, a much more, is almost a very stable economy in terms of wages, in terms of inflation rates, and what have you. So it's basically the German machine. So these are the concerns. You talk about inflation, you talk about fiscal deficit, you talk about central bank deficit, you talk about import cover. Maybe some of these smaller countries don't even have the import cover. Like I said, many of the Francophone countries are doing well at the level of inflation. They may not be doing well at the level of reserves. Okay, Ghana is certainly not doing well at the level of inflation. The inflation mirrors Nigeria's kind of inflation. In fact, at some point, the inflation was a lot higher than ours. But anyway, the bottom line is that you must show discipline when you are going into a monetary union, and you remember that you are going to lose the right to print and spend from the central bank.
So talk about, when you bring up this Euro zone example, especially using Germany, as you said, and many people believe that Germany is dragging the rest of them along, the concerns are also mirrored in terms of the economic imbalance and varying values of individual currencies and national legal tenders. How do you think that can be addressed with this conversation, with the ECOWAS and the ECO conversation? How are African countries on this side of the region meant to address that in the next 7 years?
Invariably. So in the next 7 years, what the African countries will be working towards is to see whether the countries that will come into the union can actually meet this convergence criteria. All eyes will be on Nigeria, whereas fiscal deficit of 4% to GDP, I think we're doing higher than that, because if you look at our 2021 and 21 budget, out of 13.6 trillion. About 7 trillion is about 5 trillion to 6 trillion is deficit. All right. So our deficit based on the budget alone is almost 40% or 45% of our budget in a given year. It never used to be like this. All right. But if we compare that deficit to the GDP, sometimes I want to wonder the kind of numbers we bank, because our GDP number compared to with South Africa or even an Egypt or Algeria, I don't see the complexity that is reflected in our economy, such as to justify the high level of GDP. For example, I believe that the South African economy is a whole lot more complex, a whole lot more developed than we have here, except we're just counting the numbers of people and, just basically noise factor, if I may use that econometric term. Is a lot of noise that I see in our GDP. I don't see the depth, really. So yes, our fiscal deficit, by now, I believe it will be more than 4% of our GDP, no matter how large we declare GDP to be, for one, So all eyes will be on Nigeria, because all eyes should be on Nigeria, especially with regards to what sway we would have on this union when it eventually happens. Because if the currency is going to unravel, it is going most likely going to unravel from Nigeria if Nigeria is being run the way it is being run now or has been run for some time back. Yes. However, if we were wise, we would also realize that, like, we should play the role. Of course, we are naturally playing the role of Germany in the region, but we're just playing the role of Germany in terms of spending, not in terms of production. So in terms of production, Germany is where you find the Audis of this world, the Mercedes-Benzes, the heavy machine producers, the very sophisticated, no matter how much the world is wary of Germany, it's still the biggest, if you like, even the military power in that region, if you like, of course, certainly the industrial power in that region. Right. That's what we should be thinking of doing so that we can produce very sophisticated products and sell to the region and take advantage of the single currency.
All right, Tokwe, let's take a break here. So as I mentioned earlier, there are primary and secondary convergence criteria for the ECO. When we come back, we'll look quickly at the 6 secondary convergence criteria and ask the hard question. Tokwe is getting us there, but is any country in the ECOWAS community on the path to getting this right? We'll be right back. And we are looking at the new ECOWAS deadline for the takeoff of the ECO. Tokwe Faswa is still with me. He's the CEO of Global Analytics. Tokwe, let's quickly touch on the 6 secondary criteria. So they have prohibition of new domestic default payments and liquidation of existing ones. Tax revenue should be equal to or greater than 20% of the GDP. Wage bill to tax revenue equal to less than 35%, public investment to tax, it goes on. But we also know that 2020 was a difficult year for the entire world. But beyond the effects, the economic effects of 2020, how many countries in ECOWAS are close, are on the path, or even taking baby steps towards achieving the 10-set convergence criteria for the ECO, even though they're 7 years, but we're not going to wait until 5 years down the line?
See, I think the way to look at that is that the Francophone countries have been under constant tutelage, if you like, and also constant surveillance by France. However, this does not actually translate directly to economic development. For example, they are doing well on inflation, perhaps on deficit management, but they haven't been actually allowed to have the leeway to be experimental with their economy to see what exactly, so that they can break bounds. France is interested in keeping those countries to a large extent as conduit pipes for the manufactured products from France. Everybody is moving around looking for where to sell their products and where to dump their goods as well. So you'll see that the remaining convergence criteria tend to emphasize tax revenue a lot in terms of what you can do fiscally. Well, I want to believe that those other Francophone countries are doing well in terms of driving taxes, organizing their societies a little bit better. But even when you leave Nigeria, no matter how we complain about Nigeria, when you leave Nigeria and go to those places, you don't get the buzz. You get to realize that Nigeria seems to be a bit ahead of them and ahead of the curve. I've been to a few of them in my time, and what I get is different. That they still look up to Nigeria. In fact, some of them look up to Nigeria like you would look up to a USA or something. So, but if you then now look at Nigeria and Ghana, okay, which are perhaps the 2 largest, except maybe with Cote d'Ivoire, in that region, you see that Ghana is doing very well in terms of taxes. So they've done some very serious tax reforms. Taxes are pretty much low in Nigeria to a large extent. I was in Ghana in 2019. I came back, did an expose. I wrote at length and so on what they're doing with their VAT, how they're capturing excise duties in Ghana. They don't joke with their taxes. So Ghana may get to that and get this criteria ahead of Nigeria. And Nigeria is not doing well at all in terms, especially we need to compare our taxes to our GDP. It's still less than 6% of GDP, and which is not good enough. We're talking about 20% here.
Okay, so Tokwe, we'll be wrapping up now, but I just want to ask, when we look at this common market that ECOWAS is trying to push, the number of years is almost 2 decades old at this point. We also have the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement coming in as well. In terms of the advantage for the sub-region, I think just list the 3 top advantages you think that the ECO can bring to West Africa, and we align it there as we all move forward with implementation of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement.
Clearly, it's about trade. It's about boosting trade. You know, intra-Africa trade used to be at around 16%, whereas if you look at European trade is 70%, meaning that they do 70% of their trade among themselves. By every means, yes, by every means, we should be able to achieve something close to that in time, you know, whether within Africa, but what we should be targeting is intra-regional trade, okay, first, which is what this ECO is about. Intra-regional trade in West Africa, and then we then extend it further. And what that also means is also that for our businesses, reduce cost of doing business, okay, within the region, a lot more free movement within the region in terms of businesses and what have you. I think that clearly is what we should be looking at. And perhaps we will look at the cost of managing currencies gets to reduce because it then centralized and all of that. But we have to be careful. We have to be careful. Where is it going to be headquartered? And, you know, this currency, where's it going to be headquartered? Who prints it? How do we ensure the integrity of that? Certainly, we should never agree that this currency should be located somewhere abroad. Someone says, oh, you know, you guys can't handle this yourselves. Let us print it for you in France or wherever. We should never accede to such a thing. All right. That's perhaps where things may unravel if we're not careful. Thank you.
Yeah, all right. So even though there are 10 convergence criteria, it also means that the countries in the ECOWAS sub-region must also converge on what they truly want to get out of the ECO. Tokwe Fasua, thank you as always for joining me on Business Edge. Okay, before we get into some other things, let's bring you our weekly forecast that lets you know what the market is doing. This is brought to you by Tiger Wit. And that was brought to you by our friends at Tiger Wits. Now, before we wrap things up, let's give you a few things we're keeping our eyes on here on Business Edge. And we start with this. Now, new investors could be lining up to move into oil fields in the heart of Africa. The Democratic Republic of Congo has stopped the production sharing agreements for 2 oil concessions with companies controlled by Israeli investor Dan Gertler. The U.S. Treasury sanctioned him and more than 30 of his businesses in December 2017 and June 2018, accusing him of leveraging his friendship with former Congo President Joseph Kabila to secure lucrative mining deals in the country. He denies any wrongdoing. Lawmakers in Mauritius will meet on Tuesday to vote on a second supplementary budget within 2 months to the tune of 23.6 million rupees for the fiscal year that ends June 3rd. Now, meanwhile, the country's finance ministry says that the East African country's budget deficit for the 2021 fiscal year is estimated at 5.6% of the GDP. Emerging black importers and exporters of South Africa has appealed to the Minister of Trade, Industry and Competition to halt further reviews of the import tariffs for poultry because the increases last year distorted the market. This follows an ongoing review of the tariff structure, which was last upgraded in March last year. This resulted in increases from 37% to 62% on frozen bone-in chicken portions and increases on frozen boneless portions from 12% to 42%. And finally on our list, the Kenya electricity generating company KenGen has started a campaign against global warming, becoming the first public firm in Kenya to do so. KenGen is expected to set emission reduction targets through green and clean energy while limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius as stipulated under the 2015 Paris Agreement. And that's it on this edition of Business Edge. As always, thank you so much for joining us. At News Central TV is where you can find us on social media. You can also find us on YouTube, our website, as well as our mobile app. Download it on Play Store and the App Store and take us with you wherever you go. I'm Tolulokwe Adelere Balogun. I'll see you next time.